computer. All right, so I believe we are now recording, and hopefully Sarah Jane will edit this down. so welcome Tisa to our episode, and welcome to all the viewers. So obviously we like to film these in a studio, and we are still unclear when we'll be able to return. So we thought we would do a Zoom episode for you for Kidneys in the Kitchen. I'm Melissa Prest. I'm the foundation dietitian, and we're always joined by another dietitian. So we have Tisa Ross with us today, who works with people that are being treated with dialysis. So welcome, Tisa.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course, you are welcome. So I know we had done a couple of Facebook Lives about food safety, but we thought let's just do a whole episode on food safety. So, this episode is really just going to, go through some food safety tips and tricks that are probably going to be very important for those that are immune compromised with transplant or being on dialysis. So without further ado, we can kind of get into the questions. So I know before, when we were kind of setting up some of the questions, we were thinking through what would be some good things to think about or to kind of discuss with the patients. So I think the first one we're kind of thinking about was, during this pandemic and during being prepared for COVID, what are some things that people should be paying more attention to, or that maybe you've been paying more attention to, to stay safe?
I would say the main thing is number one, wearing your mask. Okay, because again, as we talk and breathe and things like that, things can project. Also, of course, washing your hands, keeping everything sanitized. Social distancing, that's a big thing, especially now that the restaurants are opening and a lot of them have been open for outside. But I actually was downtown walking and I saw people, in restaurants. And of course, you're not going to have your mask on if you're eating, but you still have to be aware of everyone that's around you, as well as, if you're washing your hands and just taking extra precautions, because again, you may say come into a restaurant and, you have to think you need to wash your hands the minute you get into the restaurant. And I always like to say a lot of the things that we are really paying attention to now, we probably should have been doing all the time.
Right.
Because it's still the flu and other things going on. Right. But now we're like really, paying attention to it, so it's good. But I would say, like, anytime you go into anywhere, washing your hands, making sure you're washing your hands properly, making sure you're not forgetting your thumbs. This is something people always do, like, you're washing your hands and then you do one thumb but you don't do the other thumb. And then of course having hand sanitizer in your bags or your pocket and things like that. So I would say those are the main things.
Yeah, for sure. And I think if you're kind of at a family party too, like I know that sometimes we're starting to gather a little bit more with that mask. I know I just had a family party this past weekend, and so it was, if I was eating, I had the mask off, but then when I wasn't, I put the mask back on, right? And so I'm still trying to like maintain distance from everybody, and not get too close together. Is important. And then the restaurant with the hand sanitizer, I think you can like frequently put that on your hands. Like, I don't think like you need to do it once. And then I just feel like anytime you're like going to touch something, you're like, oh, let me just, hand sanitize my hands again, my thumbs. And I always like to kind of go down my fingers. And, so it's just, I feel like just constant hand washing or the hand sanitizer is always helpful. And I feel like if I'm eating out, I would totally wear like utensils. Like I would try to limit any type of finger foods and just things that I could eat with like utensils.
And then thinking of things like if you have ketchup or you have pepper, if you're putting your hand on them and you seasoning your food, and then, I don't know, I was just, thinking like, man, you need to hand sanitize and do that and hand sanitize again. It can become very tedious, but again, it's better to do more than to do less.
Yeah.
You'll feel better, in the long run. So
absolutely, for sure. And then what about like, a lot of times when we think about getting food, either maybe delivered food or we go to the grocery stores and bring food home, I know there's maybe some things that people are doing an overabundance of that they don't necessarily need to do, or maybe there's things they're not thinking about doing when they maybe bring food home, like, they got like delivery. So what are some tips that you share with your patients about that?
So one thing I definitely tell everyone to do is, like, when we're talking about grocery shopping, is okay. So you have to think you're not the only person in the store. I mean, everyone may not, be sanitizing. Everyone sanitizes the cart, but then what about the food? I mean, if you're picking this thing or, something else, I think it's always a good rule of thumb when you're coming in the house just to wipe everything down. And then at that moment too, when you have like fresh fruits or fresh vegetables, just to rinse them off and wash them. And then you can put them in like Ziploc bags or things like that to put inside of your refrigerator. Or if your refrigerator, you feel like it's properly wiped down and sanitized, then you can put them in the refrigerator. But again, you have to make sure it's in the right compartment, because that's what we're all talking about, food safety.
Right.
You don't want to have wipe it down and then you have it below, fresh chicken or something like that, and it's dripping, on your fruits and vegetables. So I would say number one, wiping everything down, and getting rid of the bags, not keeping the bags, because sometimes people keep the bags for different things that they want to do. And then number two, when you're ordering food and it's being delivered, there are a lot of options for the carrier to put it on your door. One thing I like to do is like, if it comes in, I tell my patients, when it comes into your house, you may have your gloves on or just your hands, taking it out of the bag, taking it out of your like to go here. And then you can put it in on a plate, or you can have it in like little shallow dishes and things like that if you want to store it later, washing your hands and then going about your day. Yeah. So it seems like a lot, but again, and right now they've had no cases where COVID has been transmitted through food or anything like that. But it's just an extra precautionary. Yeah. On top of that, for some people, they may even want to put their food in the microwave for a second or two, if it's been waiting outside and things like that. Because that's another issue too. You're ordering food, you forget it's outside. My sister. That happened to my sister. She ordered food. She forgot it was outside. The next morning, she calls me. She goes, "Guess what? My food's outside." I'm like, "What?" She's like, "It's been out all night." I'm like, "You can't eat that." She's like, "It's cold outside. I can eat it." I'm like, "No, you can't."
Yeah.
So.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, I always will put stuff on like a plate, or when you take it in, and if you are using, I know a lot of stores are limiting people from using their own reusable bags, but if you are using a reusable bag, wash the bag, like put it in the wash machine if you could do that, or wipe it down with bleach wipes inside and out. But I do know a lot of stores are we're kind of going back to like single serve bags right now, just to make sure that we're not transmitting anything. But you're right, there's been really no reported cases of COVID coming in through the food supply. It's really been more person to person transmission than what we're eating, like some other things like salmonella that we might think of. Or I think I just saw a recall about bagged salad again. So there's that. Those would be something that's obviously different than a respiratory illness.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So when kind of talking about, like, take a little step back, but like, what do we mean by food safety? Like when we talk about like food safety, what does that mean?
So when we're talking about food safety, we're always talking about the 4 steps of food safety, which is clean, separate, cook, and then chill. So when you're cleaning things, first thing you're doing, you're washing your hand. You're making sure that your hands are clean, and that you're also having a clean work environment or a clean place where you're going to prepare your food. And that's really important. Okay. And then also when we're talking about separate, we're talking about, I have here some examples, having different types of cutting boards. This is important. I like to use the color-coded ones. Let's see if you guys can see these. Because again, so like for me, I'll do like some of my meats on red, and then I'll maybe do, vegetables here, and just different things you would have for the different colors. Okay. And then too, for me, maybe because I'm a little tedious, if I'm gonna cut chicken, it's like, okay, I'll do like, okay, if I do like the meat, I'll have like, say chicken, and then I'll do like fish on this You know what I mean? If I'm gonna cut it or prepare it or something like that, then your vegetables on something else. So definitely having different cutting boards and things like that. Keeping your raw meat separate from things that are cooked, or like your raw vegetables. That's really huge. You definitely don't want to use the same knife. Sometimes people don't realize, they'll be cutting up chicken and then they'll cut up vegetables. Oh, it's all going in the same place. Not so much. You definitely want to make sure that you have different utensils there so that you can kind of set up your workspace, and you can have this particular knife, with this particular cutting board, and so on. And also, while you're doing this, you want to actually make sure, going back to clean, that you're cleaning up periodically while you're doing this as well. Okay. And you want to have, I even like to have kind of like different rags when I'm doing this kind of thing too. So if you have it color coded, you can kind of keep it organized. Okay. Because I'll never forget, I was at a barbecue and so you had people making vegetable kebabs, and then it was, the same person making meat. And then I'm looking, and they're using the utensils that they're turning the meat with the vegetable kebabs. And I'm like, no, don't do that, don't do that. Looking at me like, it's no big deal, nothing's happening. And I'm like, no. Things like that, especially if you're immunocompromised, that's huge. And a lot of times people don't realize that they're being affected by a foodborne illness, because it'll be something very mild, like, oh, I just had diarrhea, or I had gas, or I'm bloating, things like that. And I mean, that's not something that you should have, all the time.
Right.
And then when you go to cook, you want to make sure that your foods are cooked at the proper temperature. So if you have a food thermometer, one nice thing now is that the thermometers that they have now, to test our temperatures for COVID. I saw on Amazon those same thermometers you can test your food too. So it's kind of like a touchless one. I got my dad one for Father's Day.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, so you can do, the forehead, and then you can also do food. So you want to make sure it's at the proper temperatures, with, whole cuts of beef and pork and veal and lamb being at 145 degrees Fahrenheit, ground meats at 160 degrees, and then your poultry, your chicken, leftovers at 165. So another thing to keep in mind too is when we're talking about things like, because I know a question that I get a lot just from my patients, they'll be like, well, why is it that I can have a steak that's medium rare, but if it's a hamburger, it can become a problem? And you have to understand, when it's ground meats, all of the parts are being grounded together. So when you are dealing with whole cuts, you really have to, like a steak, you just need to get like the top, the bottom, that would have been compromised, or maybe would have touched, some type of foodborne illness.
Yeah, that's surface area, and like a steak versus the ground meat where it's just completely, like you said, exposed and
right.
open.
So you want to cook all of that thoroughly.
Yeah.
And then chill. So this is a big deal too. At the end, another process is refrigerating everything. So you want to keep your refrigerator at the proper temperature. So you would like to have a thermometer inside of your refrigerator. I think most of them come like that now.
Yeah.
And then after you cook, like you cook your foods and things like that, you don't want to keep it just sitting out all day, because I've been to holiday parties around my house, and it's like, wait a minute, we started this at 1 o'clock, it's 7 o'clock, why is the food just sitting there? I know you want to make things festive, but you definitely want to make sure you're having things in warmers, or if it's things that need to stay cool, you want to make sure you're having them on ice. And so when you're cooking and you're done and you're eating and everything, you want to make sure that you're putting them in smaller containers and putting it in the refrigerator. You don't want to put a pot of chili in the refrigerator. You want to separate that pot and put it in smaller containers. And then when you're thawing food, that's another thing that's huge, because a lot of times people will thaw their meats and things like that. They'll just thaw it in the sink, just sitting there. Or some people will tell me, oh, I just thought it, I left it out and I went to work. I'm like, that's not good, because that's the danger zone. Anytime it's left there within that 4 hours, that can become the danger zone. So you definitely want to make sure if you want to thaw it, you're putting it in the refrigerator the night before, or you having cold, water that you're letting sit, and you keeping it in a pan. So
yeah, and the danger zone being that's the time in which bacteria will grow on the food that's already been cooked. So you had this food, you've cooked it, now it's perfectly fine to eat, and now you've left it out too long. The temperature is increased, just the ambient temperature, and so now it's the perfect environment for bacteria to grow, which then would also make you sick.
Exactly. Yes. And see, and that's the thing, again, if you're already, all these things add together. So let's say you get sick from that. So your immune system is already fighting that. And then, you may have some type of other issues going on, other health issues. Your immune system is fighting that. And then you come in contact with something like COVID. That's the issue there. So it's just overtime for your body. I mean, it would just be like if you're in school and someone gave you a 10-page paper, and then the next day a 20-page paper, and then the next day, a 30-page paper. When you add all that together, that's what makes people more susceptible or able to get COVID and things like that. So that's why it's definitely, not just COVID, I mean flu, because flu season is going to come back up. That's why it's really important to be mindful of all of this.
Yeah. I always think it's funny. People think dietitians are the food police. Like they think we just go around and tell people don't eat these things. I mean, obviously we do say these things to patients depending on what's going on. We work with them to, eat the foods they like within a reasonable amount. But I feel like dietitians are really more the food safety police, because like I think we all go to parties, and I'm not judging what you're eating, but you're certainly looking around to make sure that the food is is it safely storing out right now?
Right.
I think we all look for that.
Right, because they'll always think like, you eat that, and like, I eat cookies. I eat cookies, but what I don't eat is potato salad that's been sitting out for 5 hours. That I'm not gonna eat. So, and I think because what happens with a lot of people is just a lot of things they don't realize is an issue, because they'll say something like, well, I've been doing this, this long, and it hasn't bothered me. And it's like, maybe it did bother you, or maybe it didn't bother you because at that moment, but maybe you had a few days where you didn't get enough sleep, and then you're compromised and you feeling a little sick, and then something like that can really make the difference.
Well, like you said earlier too, like you could have very mild symptoms, and then you can have very severe symptoms. And so I think a lot of people think, oh, I have foodborne illness, I'm extremely ill, and I have a lot of gastrointestinal distress and symptoms from it. But you could have very mild symptoms of it, so you wouldn't necessarily know and think like I'm fine, but you actually are having some illness from whatever bacteria was on that food.
Right. And then too, it could be a situation, let's say you having mild symptoms, but then a spouse could have more severe symptoms, or children or older grandparents or something like that. And then it's a bigger, issue, or a pregnant woman, or, things like that. So a lot of times we have to think about everyone else.
Yeah. And so kind of thinking back with the 4 principles, like for the clean, something else I always do too is like, even if you start it, like you said, beginning, like you want to wash your hands, make sure you have a clean space. You kind of talk about cleaning throughout the process, but I also like clean my hands. Like if I was making like cookies, right? You're making cookie dough, you use raw eggs, you break like raw eggs into a bowl, and then I toss them, and then I wash my hands before I go on to like the next step in the recipe. So even though anything I'm using will get cooked, you still want to like prevent having, whatever is going on into your food.
And I like that. I really like that you brought that back up, because that's really, really important. Because I think that's something that, especially as us as dietitians, we just kind of do. And then other people will be like, oh, I don't need to wash my hands again. But you need to be washing your hands between each and every step, like you said, which I think is really important. Because if you have raw, fish, and then you're like, oh, let me go grab this out the refrigerator or this or that, then you're like, everything you're touching is becoming contaminated.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Touching all these like surfaces that then you have to like go back and wipe down if you didn't wash your hands.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was thinking about your cutting board example too, with the different cutting boards. You know, it's kind of thinking through, like, let's say you're making like a salad and you're going to do some grilled chicken on the salad. Like, you obviously don't want to cut up raw chicken that you're then going to cook, and then you're going to use that same knife on the same cutting board with raw salad vegetables that you're just going to like chop and then eat. So then you're just kind of eating all of the raw chicken, you know, that was left over on that cutting board and knife. So it's always important to, if you don't have separate cutting boards, to wash all of those off really well before you use them again. You know, the other thing that I will do sometimes too is maybe you would chop up all of your salad, excuse me, salad vegetables first, and then you can stick those back in the fridge, and then you can like wash off the cutting board and the knife and then cut up the chicken, because that probably would have less of a chance of having, you know, bacteria issues, unless there is some sort of, you know, we've had E. coli and spinach, I think, and romaine, and but you know, that to me is probably a little bit less of a chance than if I was doing it in reverse, because I usually will wash the cutting boards and knives, and then I like to put the cutting boards in the dishwasher to make sure that like they get that extra like sanitation and clean. Yeah, so I always kind of think about those things as well. Now, I know you brought some hand sanitizer. I don't know if you want to like demonstrate like with hand sanitizer how to clean your hands.
Yes, that'll be great. So, you know, here we got, wait, let's get it out. Wait a minute. I just opened it. I got to get, okay. Where is it at? Uh-oh. Wait a minute. I should have tried this before.
That's all right.
No, it's, oh, here's the camera. Okay, here we go. So we're showing this. This is a lot. Okay, so we definitely don't want to just be like, that's it, you know. It's just like you're washing your hands. And you see here, you get your both of your thumbs, because that's something that's really important. And again, just to keep in mind that hand sanitizer is not a replacement for soap, but if we're in a situation where we can't wash our hands, then we want to do hand sanitizer. And so it's a rule of thumb too, to how many times you can do hand sanitizer before you have to wash your hands.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think with hand sanitizer too, you want to make sure you keep rubbing your hands until they're dry. So you don't want to have them stay wet. They should be dry when you're done. Like,
exactly. Yeah. So that's the friction is what's going to get it all together. And then what type of hand sanitizer you have? Like this one is 75% alcohol. So I say this to say, because sometimes they have some hand sanitizer that's like has all the glitter and things like that. That wouldn't be something that would be effective. Right. You know, if you have this, or you can also use just alcohol with aloe vera. People use that, put it in a spray bottle, and kind of make your own hand sanitizer as well. Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to think about just the cross-contamination again, go back to that a little bit. You'd mentioned about storing in the fridge. So did you want to talk a little bit more about how you can kind of keep the food separate? Like what's the best way to prevent cross-contamination, you know, with storing or preparing? So you kind of talked a little bit about it, but if you want to talk a little more about that.
So the main thing, you want to be organized in your refrigerator. And, you know, your refrigerator already should have, it usually has compartments that'll say like fruits and vegetables and things like that, keeping that together. But when you have things like meats, you want to keep your meat with the meats. But even in that, you want to make sure that they are covered. So you wouldn't want to just have like raw fish on a plate and just put it in your refrigerator. You would want to make sure you have that in some type of Ziploc bag, and you also want to make sure that you're dating that as well, so that you can kind of keep tally of when you purchased it, how long it's been in the refrigerator. Because again, let's say you purchased it from the grocery store, it's not going to be good 7 days after you purchase it. So I would say rule of thumb, 3 days. If you purchase something like chicken, you want to cook it within 3 days or freeze it. So you want to make sure that you're dating that, and you're putting it in some type of Ziploc bag and keeping it kind of tight without a lot of air in it. And you don't want to have raw food higher than you would have some of your fresh fruits and vegetables, unless it's maybe it's in like the container. Because what if some of the juice or something like that, let's say the Ziploc bag is a hole or something like that, the juice falls onto your fruits and vegetables, you're not going to be able to have those fruits and vegetables at the appropriate temperature because you're not cooking them.
Right.
So that's something just to keep in mind, is to always keep things organized. Or if you have like to go and things like that, you want to put it in you don't want to say, oh, I ordered something and then I'm just going to shove it in the refrigerator. You may want to put that in a separate container as well. And you want to date that too, because things that you get from the, that you order and things like that, you don't want to have that longer than 2 to 3 days as well. Right. And then when you have things frozen, you can freeze things usually up to 6 months.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So let's kind of switch into like the last topic we talked about, where people are going to go to barbecues. You kind of brought that up. Or they're going to go on a picnic. So
Mm-hmm.
what are some ways that they can take some of those principles of the food safety from home into that picnic or barbecue area? So either if it's they're doing it, like they're preparing it themselves, or if they're going to someone's house or going to like a park. So what are some things that they can think about in those instances?
So I think mainly always bringing a thermometer, especially if you're going to cook out. Always having your hand sanitizer. You don't know the facility very well. You should kind of scope it out, but you don't know. Bringing your own soap, that's really big. And sometimes some of the places that you go to, even people homes, you want to make sure you're kind of bringing your own soap, because sometimes you go to people's houses and it's like a bar of soap, and it's like, I'm not washing my hands with this.
It's funny. I feel like dietitians are like more about like germs than we are if you're eating like a cookie. But yes, go on.
Right. So, you may have like something like, in your purse, you can just take out like ding, 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 and then you can wash your hands, or hand sanitizer, especially if you're out. And then also making sure, like if you're cooking out, you have a cooler, you have a cooler bag, you're keeping things safe and cooler. Oh, I should have brought my little ice things I put in my cooler bag. But yeah, you definitely want to make sure that you're having that. So a couple things. So we're going to start first with, let's say, if you're going to someone's home, because that's pretty easy. Going to someone's home, you want to bring like your little stash of soap, hand sanitizer. Okay. One other big thing too, they're cooking foods in the sink, or like using their sink. So you don't want to assume that, oh, I can wash my hands in their sink or something like that. You know what I mean? You want to make sure that you go into the bathroom to wash your hands before you eat, things of that sort. Okay. Also making sure that you're keeping social distancing, due to COVID, keeping our mask on like we talked about before. And then also that we're constantly washing our hands, even before we're making, like if we're making a to-go plate or things like that. And then a big thing is, after you've made your plate, you think about it. Everyone's using the utensils, things like that. You want to have a space where you can kind of like maybe take another plate or something and put it to the side, go wash your hands real quick before you're eating your food, so you're not kind of cross-contaminating and things like that. So that's going to someone's house. Now, if you're out barbecuing yourself or going to a barbecue outside, things like that, again, you want your hand sanitizer, you want your soap, because you're definitely going to have to wash your hands with, real soap. Want to have, like extra napkins, things like that, or a towel that you can, wipe your hands and make them dry and things of that sort. You also want to make sure that you are paying attention to how things are being served. Now, a big thing that people do when they're at other people's home. Now, a lot of times I should have brought a spoon, but when you're serving something, you do not want to touch The plate. This is something that's huge, and you want to use a separate plate each time. Sometimes, people will say, I want seconds. So they'll go get a serving spoon, boom, they're touched. You've been eating off of this particular plate with, whatever, your hands or your fork. Then if you go take the major serving spoon and hit your plate, now you have contaminated the entire thing that you took it from. Something really small, but it's so big because most people don't do that. You want to make sure it just kind of like falls off of the spoon onto your plate, because that way you're not contaminating anything. And then the easiest way to make sure that this is done, just getting a new plate.
Yeah.
You get a new plate, this won't be a big deal. Yeah. So that's one thing. If you're, out and about, making sure how things are served or how you're putting things on your plate, making sure you're washing your hands. Also making sure you have different things to turn meat versus, your vegetables, things like that. If you're the person that's hosting, having stations where you're promoting hand washing and hand sanitizer and things like that. And then also keeping things at the proper temperature. That's something that's, that's really big. You don't want to keep a to-go plate in your car all day while you're playing
Right.
and things like that. You definitely don't want to do that. And so I would say that, like things like potato salad, cheese, things of that sort, ice cream, yogurt, keeping it at the proper temperature.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so it's important to have things like on ice. And we talk about that temperature danger zone. So it's, 40 degrees to 140 degrees within about 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of after about a couple hours, you want to just probably toss it because it's, a potential for that to have bacteria. And then if it's really hot day, like 90 degrees, you have about an hour window, for something to be out before that being an issue. So at the party I just found too, a lot of us were using like just a napkin to like use the
see, that's
spoons. We put like a napkin around the spoon and then we dish it on our plate. So that's something else. If that's an option, is to use like a napkin. When you obviously, there's like hand sanitizer on the table before you even like grab the spoon. So it's like sanitize, napkin, use the spoon that way. So trying to do that, but it is hard when you have like a lot of people in a place all using the same utensil. So you want to just be as mindful of what you're doing as you can, and sanitizing your hands as best you can, as often as you can. Doing that. I know you talk about like the cooler packs, so those are always really important to make sure for like your potato salad, making sure that stays packed, because I just feel like that to me is always like the biggest summer foodborne illness hazard at like a barbecue potato salad or something with like a dairy based
coleslaw, potato salad, yogurt, I mean, all of these things. And then another thing that's huge too is when you're going to the grocery store. A lot of people don't think about that. They go to this grocery store and then they'll go to Walmart, they'll go to Target, they'll go to all these places. It's 4 or 5 hours later. You have this food in your car. It's 80, 90 degrees. This is huge. The only time sometimes people think about that is if they bought ice cream. It's like, oh, I got to get home and get my ice cream. But what about your other things? Your yogurt, your things like that, your meats especially. So it's something that you definitely want to keep in mind. And that's why it's really good to invest in a grocery kind of freezer bag that they have at the grocery stores. You put your ice packs and things in that sort in there just to keep it safe and keep it at a proper temperature.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Tisa. These are great tips. I really appreciated having you join us after work today from your house, and your great props. And I'm like, how does she have like a to-go container? I'm like, she is ready.
Look, these are at I got these a long time ago. I actually got these around Christmas time because I hosted Christmas here.
Okay.
So me being me, I'm like, okay, you guys can put them in here, because I don't want to have to put it all up. But I got these from the Dollar Tree, and it came 10 in a packet for $1. It's really good.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Any final tips or thoughts you wanted to share with anybody?
I think the main thing was the grocery store, the washing hands, staying away from the myths, about for COVID, just knowing that most, not stressing yourself out, knowing that, COVID is mainly transmitted through, us talking or touching things and not washing our hands. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you for joining. This has been a really fun episode, even though it was about food.
I can't wait to come back.
And thank you for watching. Until next time.